Rodman Philbrick is an award-winning author who divides his time between Maine and Florida. He is the author of several books, probably best known for Freak the Mighty. His newest novel for young readers is called We Own the Sky, and he's with us here on 207. Thanks for coming in. Good to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me.
You started writing your first novel when you were 16 years old. What gave you the confidence back then to give it a shot?
Well, I'm not sure that I really had the confidence, but I wanted to do that more than anything. And I wasn't letting people know that I was interested in being a writer because I thought it would set me apart. So I did finish a novel-length project in high school. Of course, it was never published. It was never good enough. It took me another 8 or 9 books to really get my chops so that I knew how to tell a story where people would want to turn the page.
You grew up on the seacoast of New Hampshire.
Correct.
And before you could make a living full-time as a writer, what did you do?
Well, I worked as a boat builder and as a carpenter.
Are those skills useful for a writer? Do they give you a sense of how to construct a story as you might construct a boat or a piece of furniture?
I think you're right. I think that kind of thing is a good thing for a writer to have, is some kind of skill like that, where you're learning about how to put real things together in the world. And you can use a little bit of that when you're working with your imagination to put real things into books. So yes.
Your new book is called We Own the Sky, and some of the key parts of the story were inspired by your personal life. Let's begin with, first of all, a woman who was a cousin of your grandfather's. She was a pilot back in the early part of the 1900s,
yes,
which was very unusual at the time for a woman.
Ruth Law, and we used to have pictures of her standing next to a very antique-looking early production biplane. And I knew she was my grandfather's cousin, but I didn't know too much more about her. Then over the years I began to read. I realized that she was world famous. She was the first person to fly from Chicago to New York and became world famous overnight, front page of every big paper in the world.
She had what was called back then a flying circus, which was basically a touring, performing company that went all over.
And they did crazy stunts, wing walking. She used to strap herself in the top wing and let them do loop-the-loops in the plane where she had her hands up in the air. They had motorcycles chasing the plane around a racetrack and climbing up by rope onto the cockpit. Very dangerous kind of stunts. And of course, people flocked to these flying circuses in those days. Many people didn't have much experience seeing even an airplane, let alone one flying fast at low altitude and taking terrible risks. But I finally came upon another picture, which is a history book of Kittery, where I live. And in it was a picture of the Klu Klux Klan marching down through Kittery, and I was shocked. I didn't realize that this had ever happened. This was in the 1920s.
Now this tied into your, again, personal history, because your grandfather lived in Rye, New Hampshire, went to work for a while in Chicago, came back with a bride who was Irish Catholic. What happened one night after they were back in New Hampshire?
The Klu Klux Klan came to the house on horseback in their robes and hoods and burned a cross. And my great-grandfather chased them away with a shotgun. But I could identify them because of the horses they were riding. And they were there because they were fearful of Irish Catholics, any Catholics, the French, the Polish who'd come down here to work in factories. All of those immigrants were the object of hatred from the Klu Klux Klan, which exploded in Maine in the early 20s.
So these two stories from your family history were woven into this novel. How hard was it to make it work? Because this, I'm sure, was a really personal story for you, and you wanted to make it absolutely as good as you could.
Well, I first had the idea 20 years ago, and the book is just out now. So it took me a while to come up with a story where I could weave these two things together and have a lot of excitement and adventure for the middle school readers who read my books, and yet have a dose of real history going on. Because I really firmly believe that if we want to understand who we are, we have to understand who we were. And that's the importance of, I think, historical fiction or nonfiction, is just to get a sense of who we are from our past. And it was a great fun researching this book, because I learned so much that I didn't know.
There's nothing new in the world except the history we don't know.
That's correct.
Rodman Philbrick, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Again, the name of the book is We Own the Sky. You'll find more information on the book and its author in the 207 section of our News Center Maine website or app. And stick around, we're going to return right after this.